You on the description of the Phoenix project.
I just have one more question about the Montauk. Were any of the subjects given psychotropic substances? LSD?
I don't know.
We don't believe so.
My gut feeling is no.
In conjunction with the
I don't believe they were.
No, they used other drugs. They had one drug that would be used in connection with the Reich programming. It would make them more receptive.
This was not.
Do you know the name of the drug, the chemical name, or a generic name?
No, I don't.
Yeah. No knowledge of that
Can you
at all.
describe any of the effects of that alone, or in conjunction with the...
Okay, the effects would make you horny as hell.
Uh-huh.
That's essentially what it would do. It would make you very sexually active.
Also euphoric at the same time.
Yeah.
And euphoric?
Well, that would go along with it.
Right.
Yeah.
What was the purpose of being euphoric?
All right. Essentially, I don't...
Or they get the chair from the aliens.
We're not sure whether they got the chair itself from the aliens, but the technology base came. Yeah, the prototype came from the aliens.
Willingly or from a crashed saucer?
Maybe.
An exchange of sorts.
We don't know.
Also, I had another question on what you were describing before. Could this experience that is becoming very common of the UFO abduction could have been programmed by the government under this mind control?
Sure, it could be. Not all of it is, but some of it probably is.
Some of it.
All right. But they got this chair from the aliens, or through some connection. Another associate of ours was on the station managing money, and he actually went out and bought this chair from somebody. He hasn't been able to dig out yet who. So, what they essentially did is they took this chair, they made one computer to interface the chair itself, to stay in the digital codes, and then another computer to interface it to a special computer to the transmitter, and then the transmitter. What they actually ended up with, in essence, was a mind amplifier. Duncan here, his major responsibility on the station, he was one of the selected individuals. He had been through a lot of psychic training by the government to sit in that chair and generate thought form. The idea they had is, okay, they can transmit the signature digitally. That worked very well. They could put the person in the orgasmic state digitally. That worked very well. But they wanted a human being to generate the actual thought form, the details of what they wanted done.
From the chair?
From the chair, yeah. In other words, they would put into Duncan's mind, when he's in a trance, what they want him to think of, what they want him to think of that he's doing. The chair would pick it up. After the data was sent, that would turn on the target individual. His thoughts were channeled directly through the transmitter to the individual. It worked, but it didn't work. It worked very well, extremely well. But they found another capability. Let's say they would target Phil at Tuesday, 4 a.m. when he's asleep. You might actually discover that Phil was actually hit 2 weeks later. What did they discover? They did not block the time in of the person. What did they get? They got a time machine. Next bright idea they got was, okay, let's tell Duncan to think of a vortex connecting 1981 to 1947. He would do this. What happened? They got a vortex going from 1981 to 1947. You can walk through. Great. Now,
Duncan you had to be really good to be able to visualize. And
Duncan's very good at visualizing.
You have to be really amazing, I would think.
Well, let's not go into that at this point.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about it at this point. That's why I bring it up.
A master is a word in the dictionary.
It's a word I use. What you want.
Well, we're talking of earlier capabilities, not today. He was also raked over as well. But, what they discovered is, okay, the real time he thought of it. What they discovered is they recorded it, put the tape on the computer, did the same thing again. So now they had a tape that would open the vortex. And they started going back in time. They started going ahead in time. They actually got the time machine. That's the last phase of the Phoenix Project, was the time machine. Of
And
course,
they could control that time factor to where they wanted to
Yep.
go.
Right.
whatever he thought of, or other people like it. He wasn't the only one. They had to have at least 5 backups.
That was still phase 2.
That was phase 3.
Phase 3.
Yeah, was the time machine.
Now, that time machine, what do you know the date?
That got going about 79 to 80. They got that operational. Of course,
Fully operational?
yeah, about
So they can
79 to 80.
transmit both matter and
Thought.
signals.
Yeah,
and,
right. They had this, you could walk through the vortex. You could walk in 1981 and come out in 47.
Who, the cameras would, or the ones?
Anyone.
Can you explain
I
again
don't-
how was this developed?
what was the mechanism behind it?
First of all, this transmitter was so freaking powerful. This transmitter had enough power to warp space and time, go through Bearden's equations. There's more than enough power to do it. He had the capability of thinking of the vortex function that they couldn't synthesize. They didn't know how to synthesize that vortex function, but he knew. Innately, inherently, he knew how to do it.
Can it be mechanically synthesized right now?
I'm sure they got the tapes. I'm sure they got the tapes. Now, also, things they did was they would have the subject that's sitting in the chair think of a creature. And that creature would precipitate itself. They would have the subject think, there's a car coming up the road, stop the car. The car would stop. There'd be no electrical activity in it. They would have the subject in the chair think of change the direction of the fish. And the fish would do this sort of thing. They would have the subject think all the animals on Montauk Point are going to charge into the town. There's records of that even to this day, of all animal life coming off the point charging into the town. There'd be, you talk to the local kids, now they're young adults out at Montauk, that lived out at Montauk, you'll find out there's rumors of kids hearing big things stomping around the woods on the point. That's what came out of somebody's mind, precipitated through this huge mind amplifier. They almost had the power of creation. They could almost create a being. The problem they had is the being only stayed as long as the transmitter was on. Flip the switch. The being stopped all its mobility and faded back into hyperspace. But that's how powerful this thing was. This thing, you're talking gigawatts, and the etheric power probably many, many terawatts. You're talking astronomical etheric power. Because they're using multiple pulse modulated amplifiers on top of pulse modulated amplifiers, opening different windows from the drive of this amp to that amp, and you can encode all sorts of zero-point functions as you go through what they call the amplidyne function. See, the amplidyne is essentially a zero-point amplifier. So by the time they started pulsing the 100-watt stage, by the time they got out to the half a gigawatt output, the etheric power was up in the sky. This thing was tremendous. This transmitter, it took at times 2 generators supplying a megawatt each to run this thing. They were pumping 2 megawatts into this whole building, which you'll see pictures of. But, I don't think I can overstate how much power, as far as we're concerned in this room, it's astronomical power this thing had. This thing literally had, if the person who was sitting in the chair thought of a time warp and a vortex, that vortex would form.
Excuse me, does this have any military applications that you're aware of? Silly question.
I can think of thousands.
And is that why Eastern Europe's almost free today? Because the Russians are simply scared of this? I don't know.
Who knows? There's also other thoughts that other outside groups are saying to the Earth government, you straighten up or ship out. Who knows?
You said people could walk through this time vortex.
Yeah, right.
Did you ever walk through the time vortex?
No comment.
Do you know anybody that did?
Oh, yes.
Could you describe at least the experience, or?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I did more than once. and it's weird, to say the least. The recollection is that you.
First of all, how was it formed? Just at the beginning, before it's created, what do you see before it's created?
Before it's created, you see nothing but the building or the area that you're in.
You're in a chair or in an open space?
No, what they finally ended up doing was they took whatever Duncan or his alternates would generate, they put it on tape.
Okay.
It could generate it inside the underground area, or it could generate
from anywhere to anywhere. Anywhere in
generate it outside.
space-time.
It can be from any particular point where they chose to generate the origin, and it would go to the terminal point.
It could happen while you were.
Where?
The terminal point would be wherever they chose it to be.
And you could be driving a car. when
Future,
this happened.
past.
You probably,
I mean, what would happen if you were driving a car?
Your car will go through it.
if your car went into the entrance of it, yes, the car would go through and come out at the other end where it was. It could be 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 years in the future or the past.
You would actually.
You was going that other time to describe what
Whatever went in the beginning, the entrance would come out the other end.
I've run computer modeling.
I'm sorry?
Could the car be spatially dislocated? Could it be somewhere else in the universe?
Sure it could.
Yes.
I've run computer modeling based upon calculations I've learned from the radio sounds and such, and the vortex could have a diameter of 5 miles. Could be a 5-mile opening, or of course they could bring it down.
We could send all of Long Island.
No.
So what was it like, Al? You were saying.
It's like looking into the entrance of a peculiar spiral tunnel which was lit all the way down. You would start to walk into this thing, and then suddenly you'd be pulled down it. You would more or less be projected. You didn't walk through it as such. You were more or less propelled through it.
You walked into it.
You walked into it, correct, start. Then you were propelled down the thing like some force grabbed you and pulled you through, and you come out the other end, wherever it is. You could be far in the past, you could be in the future, it could be very close by, and it could definitely be another place, physically, other than the point where you started and usually was.
Wherever whatever point in space and time the transmitter was set to transmit
Emphasize space and time, because it could be anywhere in the universe.
Did you go back or forward in time?
Either way.
Were you physically there? Could you interact with other things there?
Yes.
Yes.
You could take remnants back with you. You could take like for example, if you projected yourself to go to another planet, you could bring something back with you.
Sure
Yes, you could.
If you could live on the other planet.
Yeah, right. I can't answer that for certain, but I would say probably.
Have you ever personally brought anything back from another time, either the past or a future?
Yes.
Was it of terrestrial origin or?
Yes, in this case it was terrestrial origin. It was a Life magazine from the year 1983 to take it back to 1943, but that's part of the Philadelphia story.
That's still continuing the Phoenix Project yet.
How big?
You guys asked the question of what it was
Okay,
like.
the description of the vortex, please continue.
Yeah. Well, the description was it was like a tunnel, coruscating corkscrew, sort of lit, sort of looked like the walls were
Solid or moving?
They were solid, but they were fluted. It was not a solid bore through rock, as you would think. It was a fluted sort of structure. And you would go down this, and you would be propelled down this tube, as it were, this tunnel, which was not straight. It was corkscrew. And it would not go in a straight line either. It would take some very strange turns, which you could not explain. But it did take turns, and you would come out at the other end, wherever you were supposed to come out, and meet somebody or do something at the other point.
Did you have like a mission?
Yes. Then you would return. Then when whatever you were doing was completed, the tunnel would reopen for you, and you go in the other direction. You walk back in it, go back to where you came from.
Exact reverse of what happened when you went there.
If someone switched off the power, would you be able to get back?
No.
No, you'd be lost in time and space.
And they never get back.
You would not get back.
People were lost.
That's what I was asking.
People were lost.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've heard of that.
Was everyone who went through one of these programmees?
Possibly.
Possibly, we don't know of all of those people, those young kids who were programmed, what the final intent was. We only have a little glimmering of part of it now, and this is in the last week or two, and it's very incomplete. It's been a mystery to us for a long time. What was the end goal of all of these kids being programmed? What did they want to do with them? I mean, 10,000 there and all the other stations? There had to be a reason.
Yeah.
When you said people were lost, does that mean that if the machine was turned off, instant disintegration or just abandoned in that time period?
It would depend on which happened first. In other words, if they went down the tunnel and got to their termination,
They were fine.
they were fine. And if the tunnel was turned off and they couldn't get it refocused to that area in time, that the person was lost there. They were abandoned, so to speak,
They
and
were
trapped
floating
in
in
that time or
hyperspace.
location. If the tunnel disintegrated while they were in transit, they were lost.
And if they
Disintegrated.
were abandoned in time,
Yeah, they could be abandoned.
and this
in
is
time.
going to be a sort of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
wouldn't they be angry and do something really wild to alter the future?
Depends on where they were abandoned.
Well, they did not abandon people in time. The problem was that the transmitter would glitch, and as you were in transit from time 1 to time 2, the tunnel would collapse,
Yeah.
and you were lost.
You might be lost intact, you might be lost in a form of being atomically disintegrated, in which
Who
case
knows?
you were totally lost.
But the philosophical question is valid. I mean, where you would go back in the past, could you alter the future?
Sure you
Of
can.
course.
Has it been done?
Has it
Say
been
right
done?
now.
Yes, there
That's the reason we exist in a time loop right now. What we do from one end to what Montauk penetrated in the past to what we do to where Montauk penetrated in the future is now fixed. Because it's fed back on itself. It's now fixed.
It is fixed.
It's fixed right now. Has to be because of that. It has to be fixed.
You went forward in time.
Went forward and backwards both. One of the first things they did with the raw recruits, as it were, after they passed the initial tests and examination to see if they were suitable for the program, and they were found suitable. I don't know what the reason was, but I do remember that one of the things they did was they sent every raw recruit forward into the future to a year around 6030 AD, and it was always to the same point. Someplace in the future, in the middle of an abandoned city, with a square where there was still a statue in solid gold.